Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Reisenberger, and I'm presenting this project to you today on behalf of Merge Conceptual Design. That's an artist collective focused on public art. I'm really excited to present our proposal for the 19th Amendment Centennial Public Art Project to you today. #Invisible tells the story of many women of all races and backgrounds, some of them well known, and some of them never heard of, who fought for equality. This is the story of the unnamed women that supported men who went on to become memorialized. This is the story of the people who continue to be disadvantaged in exercising their voting rights today. This is the story of the women who work as hard as their male colleagues and earn less. This is the story of all of us, the powerful and the powerless, as we explore what it means to live together in a democratic society. By choosing to include the invisible, we are breaking the spell. We will continue to see it everywhere. And by becoming visible, these stories will change, slowly and consistently, until everyone is equally seen, respected, and valued. Let's open our eyes. #Invisible is a project conceived to commemorate the 100th anniversary of women's voting rights in the US. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution reads as follows. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. The passage of this amendment marks a moment in time when two major social campaigns converged: the fight for equal rights for women and the fight for equitable voting rights for all citizens. While the passage of the 19th Amendment marks an important milestone, both these movements have started long before 1920 and will continue well past today. As we choose to look at these struggles, we start to see small and large details coming into view everywhere. And even the absence of voices and stories represents the presence of this fight, as it is evidence of what has been excluded by the powerful. By including what is usually invisible, we attempt to contribute to an image that is more diverse, more complete, and more just than historiography often manages to be. An image that leaves an open space to be filled with ever new stories, memories, and comments. Now the question is, how do we make the invisible visible? And how does this intention relate to the idea of a monument? For centuries, commemoration meant erecting a statue showing an individual, usually a man, who had achieved, invented, accomplished something extraordinary. Commemorating an idea was commemorating the great man who was the first one to voice it. Commemorating a war was commemorating the great man who led soldiers to victory. Many examples of this tradition can be seen on the Cambridge Common. So what will commemoration look like if we want to circumvent the trap of relating a new idea to the great man's or woman's mind? If we want to ascribe it instead to a broader movement that continues to this day? What will it look like if we want to pay homage to thousands of women who have fought and continue to fight in favor of the idea of an inclusive and fair society? One way to achieve this is to find an object of representation rather than a person. Another one is to decentralize the monument. For #Invisible, we have chosen the ballot box as the project's central image. Unlike an awe-inspiring statue, whose pedestal it actually slightly resembles, the ballot box is an easily recognizable and universally understandable object. Anyone who has ever cast a vote has experienced the ballot box as the ultimate interface between the state and its citizens, where one's personal choice turns into a political instrument, an objective dimension of the people's will. Invisible consists of two major parts: a base in the Cambridge Common, featuring a life-size ballot box at the center of a small outdoor amphitheater, and 20 decentralized boxes distributed across the city. Whereas the central box will have a lockable slot as well as a lockable door and can actually be used for casting votes, the 20 boxes throughout the city will function as a display for 20 paradigmatic women and their stories. They will be placed at a height accessible to all: children, differently statured adults, and those in wheelchairs. Due to their relatively small size, they can be installed on regular sidewalks, similarly to street furniture, without creating an obstruction. The central hub of the installation will be located at the eastern portion of the common, easily accessible from a pathway. This area is partially shaded by existing trees and creates an intimate environment for contemplation or assembly. In addition, 2 of the decentralized boxes will also be installed in the park, relating to 2 specific monuments. Overall, 20 boxes will be distributed around the city. The final locations will be defined through a public outreach process. Some locations we are considering are represented on this map. For instance, there's the vicinity of the Women's Center at Tubman Square and River Street, the oldest continuously running women's center in the country, or the vicinity of the Election Commission at 51 Inman Street. In general, all locations should have a public arena and be able to encourage members of various demographic groups to interact with them. At the central hub, a 22-foot diameter auditorium will be constructed of 2 15-inch high concrete sitting steps for an overall height of 30 inches. The ballot box will be placed at its center and can function as a lectern for assemblies, workshops, or remembrance events being held there. A stainless steel text band quoting the full text of the 19th Amendment will encircle the box and will be inlaid into the concrete paving. A marker with general information will complement the site. In addition to providing the home base for the project, this amphitheater can serve as a location for temporary projects and discussions related to voting. A local organization focusing on voting rights could be invited to temporarily and repeatedly activate the ballot box for a specific discussion and events. For example, projects like Her Voice by Cambridge Winch and Latin School students that asks women, "Are you going to participate in the 2020 election? Why and how?" could be invited to utilize this infrastructure. The vertical marker next to the amphitheater will serve as an introduction to the whole project. It will hold a mission statement, sending people out into the city in search of the invisible. Furthermore, it will serve as a directory to the location of the other 20 boxes and can also be used to accommodate information or infrastructure for temporary projects. One way of using it, for example, could be to provide voting ballots at the marker and to ask the public to voice their opinion on a certain subject by casting a vote into the ballot box. Unlike the central piece, the 20 decentralized boxes won't invite passers-by to leave something, but rather to explore their contents. Each box will be dedicated to either a specific woman or to a group of women. These women are not set onto a pedestal. If one wants to take the similarity between the box's form and a pedestal literally, one could even say they are to be discovered inside the pedestal. Extensive invisibility of women has long served as a foundation for the paradigm of the great man. Taking a closer look makes them visible in their own right and nature. On the outside, a 2-digit number identifies each box and is reminiscent of the numbers often identifying the voting precinct on ballot boxes. The numbers seem to be randomly distributed between 01 and 99, indicating that this is an incomplete collection with many gaps. Upon closer look, the numbers for each box is derived from a year related to the specific story that is represented inside. Resembling an everyday object, the boxes can easily be overlooked in the busy street life of its city. Only their recurring aesthetics, the hashtag invisible, the number, and a small opening in its side may instigate curiosity. On its front side, the box opens like a book and tells the story of one paradigmatic woman and her struggle for visibility and public representation. On the side of the box, an opening invites the observer to explore a mini installation related to her story. Unlike the random passerby of a statue, the observer has to lower their head and bring their eyes to the slot, but must take a closer look to make an effort in order to meet one's counterpart. In the intimacy of this interior space, the viewer can study a portrait of a woman they have read about. Because the space is viewed through a red and cyan glass filter, the anaglyphic photograph comes to life in 3 dimensions and appears to expand beyond the space. And the encounter doesn't stop here. Developed out of the different women's stories, every box will hold an object placed between the picture and the onlooker. Together, the object and the 3D photograph appear to quite literally pull the viewer into their space and invite the observer to enter into a deeper dialogue with the depicted woman and her ideas. This leaves an opening for interpretation, association, and questions to be asked, and sets the stage for an encounter between ideas from different eras and backgrounds and a contemporary mind. So here are a few technical details describing the construction of the box. It shows, for example, that the hinge will be self-closing, so as somebody opens it, it will close as they leave the installation. And this is a list of different materials we suggest to use for the installation. One thing I want to just point out is actually the effect of 3D glasses, which most of us are familiar with from a 3D movie experience. That's basically very similar to what we are suggesting in this installation. The women depicted will be chosen to represent the many facets of the struggle for equal rights and suffrage, from historic to contemporary. The selection is not meant to be exhaustive or complete. Instead, it aims at being diverse, playful, and evocative also of the stories that have been omitted. While the grand dams of the historic women suffrage movement in Massachusetts certainly should be represented, public meetings and targeted community outreach will solicit the Cambridge community's participation in identifying less known actors, including women working towards equalizing access to voting today. To stake out the potential range of stories, the following slides show a few examples of women and their respective time periods, which we have been exploring so far. Due to the limited presentation time, I can give you only a brief note on the individual stories, but I want to invite you to have a closer look yourselves later on. Lucy Stone was an early Massachusetts suffrage activist and founder of the first National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester in 1850. She fought hard to be able to go to college and was one of the first women retaining her maiden name after marriage. Anne Hutchinson was an early inhabitant of the Massachusetts colony and an influential religious teacher, which eventually led to her prosecution, excommunication, and banishment. In 1637, her ideas were the object of an election at the Cambridge Common Election Oak, close to which this box should be placed. The second box in the Cambridge Common is called Invisible Women and is dedicated to all the women who have not been memorialized in places of historical worship from the 1800s to today. It is placed next to the Irish Famine Monument that depicts the only female figure in the memorial park, an unnamed starving Irish mother. Haudenosaunee women were the first women known to have voting rights in America, a right that was laid down in the Constitution of the Iroquois Confederacy, the Great Law of Peace, in 1451. This is a document that is believed to have influenced several core aspects of the United States Constitution. Marie Martin Foster was an African-American civil rights activist and an activist for voting rights in the 1960s. Through very practical interventions like teaching people how to write their names, she contributed significantly to the registration of Black voters. Overall, her story relates to the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Here's some additional examples of women that could be included. Victoria Woodhull is the first woman to run for president in the US in 1872. So she's another pioneer to be remembered. And by including Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, we want to highlight the unfinished struggle for voter enfranchisement in our time. She's the executive director of a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that seeks to increase voter participation in Massachusetts today. This is an example of the kind of connection we are hoping to make through an extensive and direct dialogue with the community. So apart from collaborating with various local groups in the making of the project and from providing a community hub with the amphitheater, we open up the potential to expand the project into the virtual space. This is done via a QR code leading to web-based information, but also through the hashtag. The hashtag in the project's name is currently not associated with any specific cause, and this has the capacity to establish the agenda of the project also on social media and in the wider public discourse. The adoption of the 19th Amendment on Thursday, August 26th of 1920 fulfilled roughly 150 years of political engagement and struggle of uncounted women and several open-minded men fighting for equal voting rights for all citizens, and thus fighting for political representation, which means visibility for all. 100 years later, nobody would like to question this basic right. And yet, as we celebrate an essential milestone on the long road to a truly egalitarian society, let's not forget to turn our gaze to the gaps that even the best constitution leaves for the invisible. As we are reminded through the current unrest facing our country, our society is still struggling to fulfill its promise. Democracy is not a given, never. It is a constant process of growing awareness for the many parts that make up a community, a country. Giving visibility to the invisible is necessary over and over again. It is a quintessential prerequisite and a powerful leverage for change. And it means taking responsibility, participating. Like the great Indian poet and activist Arundhati Roy put it, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There is no innocence. Either way, we are accountable. Thank you for your attention.